Wicked by Gregory Maguire came onto the scene in the year 1995, but it came into my world in the year 2000 when my parents bought my sister this specific copy of the book, and she tore through it very quickly and then passed it on to me, her younger sister, who was only 8 at the time, and I tore through it and loved every moment. Was this book way too mature for an 8-year-old to read? Yes. Yes, it was. Did reading this book at such a formative age set my life on a different path? I think so. And the reason for that is not only did I devour this book and read it several times, but I also read the second book and I read the third book. I never got around to the fourth book, partially because it is so ridiculously massive, but it sat on my shelves proudly. But on top of the book series, which was a mainstay in my childhood, I also became just a little bit obsessed with a very little known musical. You might have heard of it, called Wicked. I remember the musical coming out vividly. I was 11 years old and I was already a huge fan of musical theater. I grew up in a family that really valued the arts in general, so we listened to a lot of different types of music. I was introduced to classical music as a child. I read a huge range of literature. We went to art museums, but we also went to plays and musicals. The first musical I ever saw, I was 4 years old, and we went to see The Phantom of the Opera. And I remember crying at the intermission because I felt so bad for the Phantom because he had no friends. So my love of theater and musicals in particular grew from a very young age. And for those of you who don't know me, welcome, by the way, I'm Elizabeth. Feel free to hang around for a while. I actually ended up pursuing musical theater professionally. I got my degree in musical theater. I performed professionally through my 20s in musicals. I have a very deep love and appreciation for the art form that is musical theater. And Wicked was really the first time that I witnessed the birth of a mega musical in a way that I don't think had really been seen prior. Yes, there were popular musicals that had been on Broadway for a long time, musicals that really captured the cultural zeitgeist, but Wicked was in a league of its own, especially with young fans of musical theater. As anyone who has ever been to an audition with young singers will know, especially between the year 2003 and at least 2013, Wicked had young singers in a chokehold, including myself, because one of the 2 songs I sang at my audition to get into musical theater school was popular from Wicked. I'm not going to get into the whole history and cultural impact and impact on musical theater that Wicked the musical has had, although I could talk about it for probably days, but I won't. I'll just say that Wicked the musical shaped me as a person in ways even more profound, possibly, than the original book. I had already memorized the entire soundtrack by maybe a month after its release, but I wasn't able to actually see Wicked in person until the 9th grade when a friend of mine, thank you Christina, hope you're doing well, brought me with her to see Wicked in Toronto, and it was magical. I knew all the songs. I was so invested. I knew the story so deeply. It was part of my DNA. And seeing Wicked on stage at 14 made me realize that maybe what I wanted to do, maybe what I was meant to do, was to perform in musicals on stage. Not just enjoy them, not just learn all the choreography from Chicago and dance it full out in my living room, not just sing all of the different harmony parts as I play from my easy piano musical theater selections book. I'd always loved them and I'd always sort of dreamt about getting to perform in them, but I really feel like seeing Wicked in person and the level of emotional attachment I had to that story and those characters just brought it to a whole new level for me and made me realize that maybe it was something that was worth pursuing. And while I am no longer pursuing musical theater professionally, it is something that will always be part of my life. It will always be a deep love of mine and might be something that I return to at a later date. I truly can't imagine my life without any musical theater in it, and Wicked really was a big part of that. So you'll probably see where I'm going with this, which is that obviously the Wicked film, when you're watching this, has just released. I will have just seen it on opening night in my local theater, and in honor of a film being made of Wicked, finally, after all these years, I decided it was the absolute perfect time to reread reread one of my childhood favorites and share my thoughts and see how it feels to read it as an adult and with all of this further context, and then go see the movie and see how well they did, not only at adapting the musical, but also adapting the book, because from what I have gathered, they are trying to pull in more details from the book that were cut from the musical. So I feel like this is going to be really fun, for me at least. I am just so excited, and it makes it even more special that I still have the original copy that my sister and I shared growing up, but I just can't wait to read it now as an adult with way more lived experience and a way more developed ability for critical thought and analysis that I just did not have as an 8-year-old, which, I mean, one can only hope that their ability to analyze literature will improve from the age of 8 to 32. So I'm going to read to the halfway point, give you a halfway update with and without spoilers, clearly marked. Then I'll read to the end, give you a final review with and without spoilers, and then I'm going to go see the movie with my husband on opening night here in the middle of nowhere, Canada, and I will share my review of the film and my thoughts on how they did at adapting the material and whether I liked it or not. Obviously, I'm not a film critic, but again, I feel like I have enough background with this story to maybe have an opinion worth sharing. So I'm just over the moon. I'm so excited, and this is going to be really, really fun. I truly could go on and on and on and on and on about this, but I won't. I'll stop. I've said enough. I'm so excited. So I'm gonna go read this. Before I start though, I do want to thank this video's sponsor, Parade. Y'all know I'm a huge fan of Parade. I've been partnering with them for a long time now, and I've been buying from them for even longer. They have some of the softest fabrics out there. I don't think you even understand. I wish I could let you feel the fabrics through the screen. If you want your underwear to be truly comfortable, I highly recommend you check out Parade. My current favorite go-to set that I've been wearing basically as many days as humanly possible is the vintage soft triangle bralette. I have this bralette in many different colors. Of course, for this video, I had to highlight this beautiful green, which is one of my favorites, but I also love this yellow sunshine. This is my newest color in this bralette style, and I love the sunny yellow. It is so needed as it gets to be winter here and it's just dreary and snowy every day. I love the slightly deeper cut in the front because it works with more necklines of tops, but this is not only made out of their incredibly soft and cozy new cotton fabric, but they also have a slightly thicker band around the ribs and thicker straps if you go into the extended cup sizes, which I do, which give just that little bit more security and support that is really nice to have with a bralette, even one that is softer like this one. I also love all the vintage style underwear, especially the vintage high-rise brief. And this is the perfect time to try Parade if you haven't yet, because they are currently running their biggest sale of the year. This year, Parade is giving everyone 30% off their entire website, but if you use my code, that bumps up the sale to 50% off. So don't forget to use my code bride-bf to bump the sale up to 50% off the entire website during their Black Friday sale. I have heard so much amazing feedback from all of you in the comments during past partnerships about how you've tried Parade and absolutely fallen in love with them based on my recommendation. And I love hearing that. It makes me so happy to spread fun, comfortable, sustainable underwear with the world. We all deserve to be super comfortable and supported and cozy at all times. I'm also definitely taking advantage of the sale this year to buy some gifts for friends and family. I have several family members who are about to become parents or have just become parents, and they extra super need to be as cozy as possible right now. This is also an amazing time to stock up on some of Parade's original viral pieces, their replay pieces, which have 360-degree stretch and are ultra soft. I love my replay pieces, and I know lots of other people do too, since this restock is back by popular demand. Don't forget to take advantage of their Black Friday sale, 30% off site-wide, bumped up to 50% off site-wide with my code bride-bf. And if you've tried Parade, I would love to know which pieces are your favorite and what fabrics you love most. Let me know in the comments down below. It truly makes my heart so happy to read comments from you telling me how much you've loved something I've recommended, and Parade is one of those things that I just know more people are gonna love if they give them a chance. So thank you again to Parade for sponsoring this video. And now I am going to finally get started on my Wicked reread. I am so over the moon excited. Let's go. Honey? What's wrong? Oh, what's wrong, my dear? Oh. Okay. Well, be careful, honey. You're gonna fall. Can I have this? Thank you. All right. Well, I have just reached... Don't rub your face on that, please. So I've just reached the halfway point of Wicked, and Yoda is giving me more of a witchy vibe, you know, contributing her black cat aura to this video. But yes, I am halfway through, and obviously I have many thoughts. Just a few thoughts. And what are you doing? Okay, bye, honey. So yes, many thoughts. I think the Yoda, now is a bad time for that. Come on. Oh, hi, Chewie. I'm living in a circus of cats. So many thoughts. The very first thing I want to mention is that as soon as I started this, I just felt like I was hit by a huge wave of nostalgia. I have not read this book for easily, I mean, the last time I reread it was probably when I was around 15, I would say. So not quite 20 years, but not far off. And it's just a little mind-boggling that it's coming back to me so strongly. Not only the plot and the characters and the themes and all those things that, I mean, many of those things lingered. I didn't have to start rereading to remember them, but the specific wording, some of the quotes, some of the very tiny little moments and metaphors and descriptions and just turns of phrase and just all those teeny tiny little things, you know, as soon as I read them, it just feels so familiar. Like deja vu times a million, and it's very pleasant. I'm loving the experience, honestly, of rereading it and just bringing back all those feelings, like I said. And it's just kind of fun to be doing this not that long after I did my reread of the Anne of Green Gables series, because especially the first book of that series is another one that I reread a bajillion times as a kid and was so formative in the development of my personality and interests. And taste in literature, I would say, and in characters. And I feel like this is no different. While I definitely would not recommend that 8-year-olds read this, I was definitely too young to read this book. I'm not even sure that I would confidently say that this is good for teenagers. Again, I'm only halfway through, so I don't remember all the details of the second half, but there's already been a few moments in the first half that give me pause and make me feel like this should firmly be a book for 18 plus. So again, not really age appropriate by any stretch of the imagination. But on the other hand, I do feel like this book was instrumental in some ways in developing my critical thinking skills and my interests and passions in life. So many of the themes here that are dissecting good versus evil, nature versus nurture, free will versus destiny, the differences and similarities between magic and religion, as well as animal rights, which in this case is animal with a capital A, which is more of a stand-in, in my perspective, for oppressed people and groups of people who have been systematically dehumanized as a method of oppression, but also applicable to actual animals. And I went vegan at 20. This is also a book that has a lot to say about politics and propaganda and authoritarian governments, especially, and oppression, colonization, but also commentary on religion as an institution, but also sort of comparing different types of religion and showing how they're all just slight variations on a theme. And again, I feel like that was sort of the seed planted. To be fair, I did read voraciously as a child, so I wasn't just getting all my ideas from this single book, but it just feels like this book has so many things in it that led to big parts of my life. So again, there's so much commentary and criticism of religion here, and I ended up as an atheist after being raised Presbyterian. It's just really interesting to me. I don't need to get into all the nitty-gritty details. I'm just finding it fascinating. And to be fair, you know, not to give 8-year-old me too much credit, I'm sure the first time I read this, a lot of this thematic content was going over my head. But to a certain extent, it had to be sinking in there. You know, I had to be getting some ideas and absorbing some of the messaging around propaganda and racism and oppression and xenophobia and authoritarianism and colonization and animal rights and hypocrisy of religious figures and leaders, and just overall this sense of passionate advocacy for what you care about and thinking for yourself, really that critical thinking piece. I feel like in the first half of this book, at least, because that's all I've reread, Elphaba is so strong-willed and strong-minded. She has her own opinions. She is willing and able to stand alone when her opinions differ from the majority. She's willing to stand up for what she believes in, even against an overwhelming tide. She's passionate. She has those activist roots, and she's incredibly intelligent and discerning and a diligent hard worker, and she has a lot of compassion and care and genuine empathy for other people who have gone through hardship as she has. Again, I've only read the first half, so I don't want to speak too soon, but so far it's definitely holding up. There are a couple moments here and there that are painfully 90s. Maguire loves to refer to men and women as males and females, but this was long before referring to women as females had this incel association, and referring to men as males tied into this like alpha male, beta male, again, incel rhetoric. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, maybe that kind of rhetoric was around in the 90s, and those sorts of interpretations and the objectification or dehumanization of the use of male and female for human people was already a thing in the 90s, but I was 3 years old when this book was first published, so I don't have that cultural context personally. I don't remember really noticing that being a thing until the last decade or so of my life. It's just, you know, a thing I'm noticing. There are a couple other sort of outdated terms used and just, you know, sort of questionable moments that make you raise an eyebrow and just wonder what's going on here. And I'm sure there will be more. I do have some distinct memories of some of the stranger parts of this book that I definitely did not have the maturity and the context to process as an 8-year-old that, you know, were interesting and revelatory, but maybe not in a good way. So I've come across a couple of those, and it is funny to read them now as an adult because they're still strange now for me as an adult with much more life experience. But it's funny to think back on how 8-year-old me processed a lot of those moments. And to be honest, the way I processed most of them was to just quickly read on and kind of wipe it from my mind, at least my conscious mind, and then have to deal with very strange dreams. Anyways, I'm really loving this. Like I said, there is a lot here in terms of the thematic content and the commentary. I do really want to look up some interviews with Gregory Maguire and see if he's talked about sort of what his inspirations were and what he was inspired to write about. This feels like a work that was maybe inspired by real life events or real groups of people who have been oppressed, but maybe it was just, you know, a larger commentary on these cycles that seem to repeat throughout history, because apparently we as humankind cannot stop oppressing each other and treating each other terribly and stealing from each other and just generally being deeply evil, which again is, you know, one of the themes of this book, this idea of where does evil come from? What is true evil? Is there such a thing as true evil? You know, where is the nuance there? Where is it born from? How is it grown? How does one become evil? And are they ever fully, completely evil? You know, even just with Elphaba's birth story, perpetrating an act of violence as a, you know, couple minutes old infant. And, you know, looking at it on the one hand, one perspective is that she was evil from birth because she bit off one of the women who helped her mother in labor. She bit off one of their fingers as a newborn baby. And I mean, yeah, not great. But on the other hand, there is some context there for why possibly, I mean, losing the tip of a finger is maybe a bit extreme, but the woman whose finger was bitten off was not necessarily without blame in this situation or without, you know, her part to play in this dynamic. dynamic. Also, can an infant that is a couple minutes old truly have any responsibility for harm they might cause other people? Having just spent time with a weeks-old newborn baby, my nephew, sometimes they punch you full force in the face, or bite you, or pull your hair, and it hurts. But they're also not, actively, intentionally hurting you. They don't really have responsibility for their actions at that age, so there's more layers there. But it's just really interesting to see how Maguire is building from Elfie's birth this idea of where evil stems from and these different perspectives on evil, and tying in those different prejudgments and stereotyping and gossip in with this idea of propaganda and how harmful they can be. It's just, I'm having a great time. Can you tell? I'm having a great time. I feel like I could probably talk for hours and hours and hours on everything that's explored in this first half, but I'm really trying to keep it a little more succinct here. I probably will talk a lot longer once I get to the end, once we sort of come to the conclusion of the story and we get sort of the full arc of a lot of these different themes, but we've definitely built a really nice foundation for them, and I'm enjoying it. And I'm being reminded why this book really grabbed my heart and mind as an 8-year-old and just kind of blew me away and opened my mind to so many ideas I had never had a reason to consider, again, as an 8-year-old. And I do think that it has had some sort of significant impact on the person that I turned out to be, which is kind of cool and funny and strange and awesome. I'm both aware that I missed probably a lot in my first several readings of this book, but also thinking that, I'm kind of impressed by 8-year-old me, because I think I picked up so much more on the thematic content and the subtext and on some of those critical thinking points than I would expect an 8-year-old to. So I'm just kind of in awe of 8-year-old me, honestly, that I was able to get through it and understand as much as I did and be so entranced and excited by the ideas and wanting to explore it further and read more. And I just think that's really cool. Honestly, I'm kind of feeling like maybe I was smarter as an 8-year-old than I am now in my 30s, which is kind of depressing to think about. I don't think that's actually true, but in terms of the characters, Elphaba has always been, she's the protagonist. She is my favorite character. She's fantastic. I love her. Kind of like when I reread Anne of Green Gables and I was pointing out all the ways that Anne is me and I am Anne. I kind of feel the same way about Elphaba in a lot of ways. We're both quiet, bookish people most of the time, a little more of a loner and very curious and academically minded or thoughtful, I suppose. But we can get really riled up and passionate about things we care about and sort of get into that activist mode and research rabbit holes and standing up and yelling when things are going wrong and having a little bit of wariness around people, but ultimately having a level of care and support and love for the people around us and a vulnerable, tender heart that can be easily wounded as much as we might try to hide that. And we're not similar in every possible way, but I do think that part of the reason why this book touched me so much is that Elphie, again, at least in the first half of the book, really reminded me of myself, and I felt I could see myself in her in so many ways. And this sort of loneliness and deep need for love and affection and acceptance and belonging and care, but also this sort of strength and walls being put up to protect yourself from pain and hurt. I really love Elphaba. I think she is such a well-drawn, complex, nuanced, fascinating character, and I'm really excited to sort of relive the transition that happens in the second half of the book because it's such a significant one. It's such a huge transformation she undergoes. And then we have, Galinda or Glinda later on. I feel like the musical turned her into a bit more of a unambiguously good character in the book. She is much more manipulative and mean and more of a bully. She maintains some of those qualities in the musical, but it really is very toned down. I think the musical wanted to make Glinda and Elphaba two protagonists in a lot of ways and to have them sort of have this tender, loving friendship at the core of this story. And in the book, Glinda is much more of a secondary character. She's still one of the most prominent, if not the most prominent characters other than Elphaba, but this is Elphaba's story. It is the Wicked Witch of the West story, and Glinda is important in that story, but it's not her story. And she is much more just classist and xenophobic and judgmental and mean. She's a bully. She is kind to Elphaba to her face just to make fun of her behind her back to her friends who she wants to get in with because they're even richer than her and even more well-connected than her. There's a lot of two-facedness and superiority and pretension going on with Glinda, and she's incredibly vain and narcissistic. She is already kind of on her path of a character arc and a journey, and that is nice to watch for sure. But I feel like in rereading it, I'm just reminded of how much I hated her at the start of the book because she's terrible, and her growth is very interesting, and the development of their relationship and their friendship is very interesting. But yeah, Glinda is kind of terrible there for a good while. And speaking of their relationship, I don't know if I picked up on this as a kid, although I wouldn't be surprised if I did, somewhere deep in my subconscious. But as an adult reading this, I'm picking up on a lot of sapphic vibes between Elphaba and Glinda, okay? Just saying. There are so many moments where they, pause and notice the other one's beauty, or the way the light hits their face or their hair, or the way they talk about how deeply they love each other and their physical intimacy of cuddling and sleeping together in the same bed and kissing each other. So far it hasn't been, I don't think they've explicitly said whether those kisses were on the lips or not, but there's a lot of sapphic undertones, and there are queer characters in this story. We have at least 2 explicitly gay male characters who are friends of Box and sort of also part of this larger friend group with Elphaba and Glinda and some of the other characters. Whether it was ever meant to develop into anything or not, I don't know. I can't answer that question, although I am going to Google it. I feel like there was some intentional sapphic undertones being written into this story. Feel free to argue with me in the comments, but, again, could be reading into it, but I don't know. It feels pretty clear to me, and I don't mind it. I think it adds just a whole other layer of complexity to their friendship and their relationship, that they have this attraction to each other and neither of them really knows what to do with that. So they just add in that extra layer of complexity and sort of angst into their dynamic, especially for Glinda, who, especially at the beginning, feels like she shouldn't like anything about Elphaba and especially shouldn't like anything about her appearance. But you can tell even from that first true interaction where Elphaba tries on one of Glinda's hats and Glinda just spends a while waxing poetic in her mind about how beautiful Elphaba is and then tells her verbally how pretty she is. There is something going on there that is going further than a platonic appreciation of someone's appearance, okay? And I'm just gonna leave that there. Fight with me in the comments about it, but you're wrong. What else? Other characters. Bach, I forgot that he was a peeping Tom. Lots of fun. He definitely develops as a character, but damn, I forgot that that's how it started. Not great. Not great. Averick is a racist piece of shit. Also, I should say, from what I remember, the musical version of Fiyero is a combination of Averick and Fiyero in the book, who are 2 separate characters and very different characters in personality. Fiyero is still relatively newly introduced at the halfway point. Averick has been around for longer, but from what I remember, they have very different personalities and they have very different backgrounds. In the musical, they are kind of combined into the same person, which is a weird choice. I don't remember all the details around Fiyero. I remember liking him as a kid, so we'll see if that plays out as we get more of his story and how his relationship with Elphaba progresses. But I totally forgot about Averick as a character and that they were 2 separate entities in the book. And yeah, Averick is the fucking worst. Absolutely the worst. Terrible. Hate him in every possible way. Get him out of this book right now. I do love Bach's other friends. What are their names? I keep forgetting them. Crope and Tibbet. They're awesome. They're fantastic. Not only do I love that there are 2 clearly, openly gay characters in this story written in 1995, but also they're just very astute. They're very intelligent and they say really funny things. Like I just flipped through and got to one of the quotes where Crope says, well, a lab, it breeds things, which I just, very funny science joke that is so nerdy and stupid, but also great. And I just feel like there are several moments like that where one of them will sort of come out with this spiel about something they know a lot about, and everyone's just kind of in shock and awe and confusion because they're meant to be the two like fun-loving, bumbling party guys, basically. But they are also at Shiz University, and they are intelligent and passionate about certain things, and they know things, but they're great. I love them as characters. I also really love a lot of the other characters that are kind of surrounding it. Like Nanny is quite the character and quite vibrant and ridiculous. Amma Clutch is kind of great and sweet, and the way that she immediately is kind and loving to Elphaba is amazing, and I love that so much. And the way her story goes is really devastating. Honestly, it's interesting. Again, obviously the musical had to take liberties and change things and adjust things to be able to tell the story in the time that they had, but I feel like the Bach romantic plotline, it feels more prominent to me, I suppose, in the musical than it is in the book. It does happen in the book, but it feels like much more of a blip and sort of a moment in a progression of their group dynamic as a group of friends, rather than being a major plot point that is super important. Oh yeah, okay, so there's sort of two things I wanted to comment on. One was there are these sort of clock creatures. They're sort of androids, AI, made out of clock parts, and there's obviously the giant dragon clock that has a lot of relevance in the plot that I won't spoil for people who haven't read the book. But on page 41, we have Elphaba's father, who is a unionist minister, saying, "And now respectable unionists are going in droves over to the pleasure faith," said Frex, snorting, "or even TikTokism, which hardly even qualifies as a religion." And I just find it mildly terrifying that a book written in 1995 is talking about TikTokism and people leaving traditional religion in droves to go to the pleasure faith and TikTokism, and just this idea of that name and associating it with cheap thrills, instant gratification, hits of dopamine, and, you know, scandalous excitement and entertainment over more substance. Not to say that I think that people should delete TikTok and go join a church, because I'm an atheist and I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with the existence of social media. Obviously, I make my living on social media in some form, but there is something to be said about the way that we have moved more and more towards as much instant gratification and go and quick scrolling and short form instant content and less slow, thoughtful, deep, critical thought in a lot of ways. And it just felt like this was just a little prophetic of Maguire, especially using the term TikTokism. So weird. Anyway, so there was that, which caught my eye, which obviously I didn't notice reading this as a kid because TikTok did not exist. And then also on page, what page is it? There was a quote I wanted to read. Oh yeah, page 116, which also feels very relevant right now. It's a longer quote, but I'll just read the last portion. "In the interim, while sorcerers are at work experimenting with charms and spells, the animals lose their rights one by one, just slowly enough so that it's hard to see as a coherent political campaign." Once again, the animals lose their rights one by one, just slowly enough so that it's hard to see as a coherent political campaign. Again, animals with capital A, which is a stand-in for groups of marginalized people. I just feel like that is such a relevant quote for what's happening in many areas of the world and many pockets of the world right now. LGBTQIA plus rights, trans rights especially, and also women's rights and bodily autonomy. It's just atrocious. And again, it sort of has that feeling where up until relatively recently, it felt like a lot of those changes were slow enough to be waved away by a lot of people. And those changes were waved away by a lot of people as being not part of some larger conspiracy or a political campaign. And it's become much more clear and irrefutable recently that those smaller steps over years have been part of a larger concerted effort to remove rights from whole groups of people who, you know, deserve rights because they're humans and should have a say in how their bodies exist and what happens to their bodies and what doesn't, gender affirming care, etc., etc., etc. I could go on a long rant, but I won't. I just felt like that quote felt a bit like a kick to the gut and sort of reinforced yet again that theme of animal rights, again, animals with a capital A, and while as an ethical vegan myself, I do also read it in that way of sort of animal rights, as in the animals we have in our actual lives, and I think parts of it are relevant to that. It is obviously a metaphor for groups of human beings who have been historically dehumanized and oppressed, and it's just hard to not draw parallels to what is happening right now, and I do feel like this book speaks to that on such a visceral level that is making me clearly very angry because I feel strongly about it, and it is incredibly upsetting to watch it happening in real time. So that is the first half of this book. I'm loving it. It is powerful. It has a deep message. It has so much to say. It has so many layers. The characters are so vivid. They feel incredibly real. They are lovable and hateable and endearing and silly and frivolous and thoughtful and brave, and I'm just feeling lots of feelings, obviously. So I am really looking forward to reading the second half, but I'm very excited, and I will come back here before we go to the movie tomorrow and give you my final thoughts and feelings about the book, and then on Friday I will share my thoughts on the movie, which I am honestly, I don't know, I feel like there has been so much drama in the news about this press tour. It also feels like this press tour has been going on for the last 10 years at least. I'm a bit worried because, again, I obviously have strong feelings about this book and I hold it close to my heart, as well as the musical, which means a lot to me too, and the music especially, and I'm used to hearing it as it sounds on the original Broadway cast recording, even though I have seen it done live, and I've also heard 5 bajillion versions of all the songs sung by so many people, especially because I went to theater school. You cannot count on all the hands in the world the number of times that a group of theater kids in 2010 are going to break out into 16-part harmony singing "No One Mourns the Wicked." I feel like I have seen early reviews that are good, but I don't know how deeply the people who are giving it good reviews know the source material. We shall see. I truly am trying to keep an open mind, I promise. But I'm gonna go, because like I said, I have to read the second half of this book tonight and tomorrow before we go see the movie. So I'm gonna go do that. Hopefully you enjoyed those ramblings of my thoughts. Okay, I have to go now. I'm gonna go. I'm going. Have I gone already? I'm going. Okay, bye. Okay, so I have finished Wicked, and I've actually also seen the movie. I tried to film my review of the last half of Wicked before leaving to see the movie tonight, and my camera would not connect to my monitor, the app I use, no matter what I did, and I was getting really stressed about it, and I was worried about being late to the movie, and I couldn't get it to work, and it was just too much was happening. So I decided to just wait till I got home. So I'm home, I have seen the movie, I have all my final thoughts about rereading the book and my thoughts about the movie. So I'm going to start by talking about the book because that was meant to be the order all along, and then I will talk about the film. So let's do that. So talking about the book, you know what? I definitely feel like the first half of this book is stronger than the second half. And that doesn't mean I don't enjoy the second half, because I do. I just think the first half is so fantastic in so many ways, and so well paced and so well balanced, and really spends a lot of time focusing on so many themes that I'm fascinated by, which I already touched on in my first update. That the second half, because it does have 3 separate time jumps, some longer than others, we miss out on a lot of that critical development in Elphaba's personality. And I think it feels extra sad to me, I guess, because what we really miss out on is those transitional periods and how they impact Elphaba's personality, how they change her from who we know in the first half into who she is within the lore of The Wizard of Oz as the Wicked Witch of the West. And that's really meant to be what this book is seeing how the Wicked Witch of the West came to be, what made her wicked. Was she always wicked? And it's pretty clear that at least this book posits that she was not always wicked. And I do like that the way that she is portrayed at the end, when she is the version of the Wicked Witch of the West that we're familiar with, she still has more nuance. She is still not a black and white character. She's not just pure evil. She has people she cares about. She has causes she cares about. She has a conscience. She is conflicted. She struggles with what to do and how, and where her line is, how far she's willing to go to get what she wants and to do what she thinks is right. And I think we get a little bit of that transition in the period where, trying not to give any spoilers, in the sort of first time jump that is right after that halfway point when she has just left school. That is transitional Elphaba, I suppose, between who she is at the beginning and who she turns out to be. And we see her starting to push those boundaries and starting to wrestle with how far she's willing to go. Is doing evil in pursuit of good justified? Do the ends justify the means? And that's something that she is struggling with so much. And I think we see a lot of that in that first little section. But then the next time jump, she has changed so much. She's been through so much, and that experience, which I'm trying not to spoil, really alters her on what feels like a molecular level, and we don't get to see how that happens to her. And I realize this book would be so long if we gave as much time to all these different aspects of her life as we do her time at Shiz, but I just wish there was more, because I find her to be such a fascinating character, and I wanted to see that granular detail of how she went from that Elphaba to this Elphaba, and we do see a lot of it, but I just wanted more. So I think that's something that I struggle with in the second half, and I think unsurprisingly I remember the second half less vividly than the first half. I think the second half not only was less relatable to me as a child, because it was just even more removed from my experience as a child, to read her as a more mature adult who has been through so many things that I could not even begin to have dreamt of at that age. She felt a little impenetrable to me as a child, and reading it as an adult, I can definitely parse her complex layered emotions better. I can understand a little more the kinds of grief and trauma that she is working through. But I do still feel like Elphaba feels a lot more impenetrable in the second half. And some of that might have been by design, but I do also wonder if Maguire just had less of a handle on her as a character once she got to the second half. In some ways, it felt like he didn't fully know how to get her from A to B. And so a time jump was an easy way to change her personality in the ways that they had to be changed so that she could fit within what we know to be, or who we know to be, the Wicked Witch of the West. And, you know, I'm not saying that to diminish Maguire's ability or achievement in any way. I love this book. Spoiler alert, this is a 5-star read for me. I still think it's fantastic. This book was life-altering to me in a lot of ways, and I still loved it. I adored rereading it, but I do think it is not a perfect book, and I think the second half has more of those holes and is missing some of that really granular development that I personally would want. And again, I'm nitpicking. I am a character-driven reader. I am really passionate about this character, and so I think I'm even more greedy for details. And honestly, I think one of the most interesting things to read about is to read about a character's origin story, whatever they end up being, to read how they become who they're going to become, how the world they live in and the choices they make and the people they meet along the way mold them into the person they turn out to be. And I feel like there was a little bit missing from the middle of her story of how she got there, especially because by the end, it felt like Elphaba's priorities had shifted pretty significantly, and there were some things that she was so passionate about as a younger person and a young adult that she seemed pretty apathetic about. And again, that can definitely happen, and I can kind of see that path for her. I can see her sort of transition in that way, but I feel like her core values seemed to shift later in her life. And there are reasons why that could have happened, and I can definitely posit the reasons why that would have happened. I just feel like we weren't shown that happening. I wanted to be there with her, wrestling with her values as they shift, as she becomes disillusioned, as her grief overtakes her and changes her. Those are really the most fascinating parts of her story in a lot of ways, and to feel like we just kind of skipped by them was a little sad to me. There are a lot of things I like about the second half of the book that I appreciate, but I do feel like the focus on animal rights and the authoritarian government and oppression and all of those themes and all the political commentary sort of falls to the wayside. Not to say that the second half isn't good, because again, I really like it. The writing is beautiful. There are so many moments where I just am tickled pink by the prose. There are some really interesting conversations still. There are still some moments that are highlighting the propaganda and the escalation of this authoritarian regime and the increased oppression of animals. We do come back to that, but it just isn't nearly as present in the narrative, and I missed it because those are some of my favorite things about the first half. I also felt so sad for some of the characters who really have heartbreaking outcomes that I didn't necessarily remember some of the secondary characters, so that was quite devastating. Really trying not to spoil anything, but in the second half we do also sort of highlight generational trauma and cycles of abuse in a really interesting way. But yeah, I'm trying to think if there's anything else I can say that isn't spoilery. Oh, I will say in the second half, I feel like the sapphic vibes were basically confirmed. There is a moment where Glinda, in my mind, basically confirms that she at least had romantic feelings for Elphaba, so I feel vindicated. And I did look it up, and apparently there is an interview somewhere out there where Gregory Maguire confirmed that he always meant for those sapphic vibes to exist. I have not yet found the original interview. I am looking for it still. If you know of it, let me know in the comments. But yes, I'm feeling vindicated. I'm just going to check that off as canon forever because it makes sense to me. Is there anything else I can say that is not spoilery? I don't know. I love this book. It is a 5-star read for me. At least a good portion of that is nostalgia, but I also think this book does some really interesting things and has some really great character work and explores some important and deeply relevant topics in a way that I think is very impactful, and the writing is beautiful. So if you haven't read it, I would recommend it. I really don't know how it would land for people who have never read it before, but I love it, and I'm glad to say that I still love it. So 5 stars for Wicked. I am going to do a little spoiler section because there are things I want to talk about that I just really don't want to spoil for people who don't know this book, but you've been warned. I'm going to do some spoilers now for the book. The Fiyero-Elphaba affair is really interesting because Fiyero had a much smaller part in the first part of the book than I remembered. I guess because he becomes so much more prominent in her story and in her life, and it's become so important to her later in her life. I sort of remembered him as being this big personality, but he really is barely in the first half at all, and they have very few interactions. So it was interesting to see that he was the one to reconnect with her, but I did like getting to see more of his personality and have him fleshed out more, and to see that love story play out, and to have Elphaba find that love, especially because her love with Glinda was thwarted. So I do like them together, and I do like the implication that he might not actually be dead, which makes everything even more tragic because so much of Elphaba's shift in personality is this long grief and long period of silence, living in a cloister after she thinks Fiyero has been murdered. And this is a huge shift in her personality, and she becomes much more angry, and she loses some aspects of herself that tied her to compassion and to some of the more activist sides of her personality. He humanized her in a lot of ways. Not that she wasn't human already, but he brought out that sort of gentle, caring side of her, which was such a big part of her in her early life, but she started to try to shut that away because she felt like the cause she was fighting for was more important than her needs. And so she tried to shut off that part of herself, and he didn't let her shut that off. And I feel like after he was murdered, or she thought he was murdered, she, shut that door and threw away the key and tried to disconnect from her humanity. And she wasn't entirely able to do that, but more so than she was when he was still around. And her having that hope that he might still be alive, or even realization that he might still be alive, which isn't something that she had considered for a long time, is so devastating to think that maybe he is around somewhere. And by the end of the book, Elphaba is dead, so they will never be reunited. And maybe this whole time she could have been working to get him back if he had been a prisoner somewhere. But she took at face value that he was dead, and here we are. That's just another layer of devastating. And maybe he is dead. It has been a long time. We don't know by the end of this book. So there's that layer as well. I do think that the insistence that Elphaba does not want to be seen naked in any kind of light, that she won't let him touch her below the waist, and that the one time he sees her in a little bit more light, he thinks he might see a shadow between her legs, feels a little weird to me. It feels like we're sort of playing into this shock value, is she, isn't she, especially because when she was born, they weren't sure whether she was a girl or boy at first, and there's this narrative that maybe she is intersex, I suppose, and there's some rumors about her being a man. It feels like a very outdated, sort of stigmatizing way to present it, and maybe that wasn't the intention, but it does give me pause, and I am glad that it wasn't as big a part of the story as I kind of remembered it to be. It really is only a few little hints or moments here or there. It felt pretty icky to me, and I do wish that those parts weren't there. I mean, it would be totally fine for Elphaba to be an intersex character, but it doesn't feel like it's actually representation of someone who is intersex. It feels like it's, people making up rumors because that would be so terrifying and would just be another reason to prove why she's different or bad or evil or whatever. And that obviously feels stigmatizing and not okay. So again, I don't know. I'd be curious to see if Maguire has spoken on this at all in more recent years, or even spoken at any point about his intentions with that sort of through line. Also, I think it is maybe realistic, but very sad to see Elphaba become a neglectful, emotionally distant mother after what she went through herself, to see that she is quite dismissive and cold to her son and isn't even sure, can't even remember if he is actually her son or not. But regardless, he is in her care and she does not care for him and just lets him sleep on the floor and is very dismissive of him and his needs. It was very heartbreaking to read, and again, it's not unrealistic for someone to repeat patterns and to become the kind of parent that they had, even if they wished that they had had a different kind of parent and are trying not to be. And Elphaba doesn't seem to be even aware that she is recreating those patterns. And she does eventually start to develop some sort of a maternal instinct, but it feels very weak. And it's very much a quiet whispering voice in the background that she doesn't seem to listen to very often. So that is quite sad, especially this idea that Lear would be the embodiment of her love with Fiyero, and she loved Fiyero so much and misses him so much, and maybe there's a certain level of resentment that Fiyero is gone and Lear is in his place. That's not really explored, though. It is very hard to like and relate to a character who is being such a neglectful, dismissive, cold parent. I did struggle with that. I really enjoy the period of time that Elphaba spends at Fiyero's estate with his wife and many sisters-in-law and kids. There is something very wholesome and pastoral about that point in time, that period. I do get this feeling that if she hadn't been called away by her father to visit her sister, Nessa Rose, the eminent throp in Munchkinland, and allowed this opening for the wizard's men to essentially kidnap Fiyero's entire remaining family and torture and kill them, or enslave them in the case of his daughter, that maybe she could have found peace and happiness there. Maybe she could have lived as the grumbly, curmudgeon-y aunt in the tower and grown a relationship with her son and spent time with Nanny and developed this relationship with Fiyero's family. It felt like it could have happened for her. It felt like like that was starting to happen. And that period of time felt like it was a bit healing for her. In some ways, it felt that leaving to see her family, which I also really enjoyed, her reuniting with Nessa Rose and with her father, and seeing the ways that Nessa has been sort of twisted by her religious convictions and the ways that she has become a bit of a tyrant of a ruler in her own right. And in some ways, Elphaba finds healing with her father. And I really appreciate how complex and nuanced her relationship is with her father. But, you know, to have those moments and to feel like she's sort of found peace a bit with her family, and then to go back to the place that feels like it's home and where she feels like she belongs in a weird way, to find that they've all been kidnapped, and just that devastation. And then we get another time jump. I wish we'd had a bit more time of sort of her reckoning with that loss and the ways that that changed her, because I think that might have been that final straw, cutting the final string that is tying her, tethering her to her humanity and her compassion. She becomes even more disconnected, even more angry, even more ruthless in a lot of ways after that happens. And again, it makes sense. She's lost this family that she felt like she was brought into and she belonged in a lot of ways, and lost what feels like her final ties to Fiyero, although she does still have their son. She's lost the people who knew him and who she can speak to about him and who also have memories of him. That is that final, you know, she's been pushed off the cliff essentially into who she's going to become. But again, I feel like we didn't get to see that transition. We didn't get to see that fester and grow. We just jumped forward to the end point of when it has festered and grown into who she becomes. I also find it interesting how little Glinda is in the second half, and that moment where Elphaba brings up to her that there were rumors that she and Fiyero were having an affair, and she points out that that wouldn't be possible because Fiyero is dark-skinned, which is wild and ridiculous. And just, I mean, Fiyero is a prince, so you'd think he would have enough class for her as someone who is pretty deeply classist, but apparently she's also just racist, which I don't think was as clear in the first half of the book, to me anyway. I mean, Averick is obviously racist in the first half of the book, but anyway, that kind of threw me for a loop. I didn't remember her saying that and her positing that as the reason why she would never have had an affair with him. Mind-boggling. I do wish we'd had a little bit more with Glinda in the second half of the book. I didn't remember how little she is around and how little her adult personality is developed. In some ways, it does feel like Nessa and Glinda are living the rest of their lives under the spell of Morrible, and that there's a little bit of a dead behind the eyes puppet being pulled by strings feeling about them. And I think it would have been interesting to see even more of that. There's even, I feel, a little bit of a hint at that when Elphaba is talking about seeing Nessa navigate around in the slippers that their father bought her, that Glinda has sorcelled. Is that a word? I think so. Used her sorcery upon to allow her to balance a little bit easier without her arms, so that she can maneuver around on her own and walk more easily. And Elphaba says the way she moves is sort of like a serpent who is under control of a snake charmer. And that sort of imagery really feels like it ties back to this idea that is pervasive in Elphaba's mind, where she has this worry and this paranoia that she is still under Morrible's control, and that she can't tell if the choices she's making are her own or if they are being influenced by this spell. And she feels like she can see in some ways that Nessa could be under someone else's control. And again, I guess that sort of ties in with that authoritarian regime and the propaganda. Are we free to make our own choices when we are being manipulated by propaganda and incessant messaging? It wasn't as explicitly explored as in the first half, but there are definitely threads there for sure. I do find it interesting how little Shell, her little brother, is around. He's never on the page. We never see them interact. It does kind of make me wonder why he exists at all as a character, and the musical cuts him out. He's not in the musical. They don't have a little brother. I mean, lots of things are changed in the musical, but I just find it kind of odd that he is mentioned semi-regularly and we give a bit of his backstory, but he's so irrelevant to the story. And maybe he comes up in the other books. To be honest, I remember them basically not at all. So maybe that's why. But in this book, he feels very superfluous, and it feels like the time spent on him could have been spent on more of that, you know, slow, gradual evolution or transformation for Elphaba. We're giving us a little bit more of some of the other characters that are kind of left by the wayside. Tibbet is the character, the secondary character, who has such a sad ending that I felt so terrible for. I don't really know what happened in the Philosophy Club. There are some things implied, but the idea that whatever happened broke Tibbet's brain to the point where he was never the same, and he dies in this devastating way many years later, never having regained his, spark or his mind. Really, or his soul, is just so bleak. Poor Tibbet, because he was so vibrant and full of life and smart and funny and awesome in the first half that I was quite devastated to see him end his story that way. I did not remember that that's what happened to him. I do think it's interesting that at the end, or very near the end, Elphaba's talking to her son, and they're talking about if they could have the one thing their heart desires, what would it be? And Elphaba surprises herself and Lear by saying that what she most desires is a soul. And she spends the whole book repeatedly saying that she knows she doesn't have a soul and that she doesn't feel like a person. There are a lot of moments with her and Fiyero where she talks about not being a person. And I find it very interesting to see the ways that she feels sort of disembodied and disempowered and dehumanized, and possibly those are some of the reasons why she felt so strongly about the animal cause, watching them be disempowered and having their bodily autonomy and rights taken away and being objectified and dehumanized. But there's also those layers of, in some ways, her wishing that she had the same kind of faith that her father and sister have, that they hold to so fervently, that she had hope and that she had the surety that she had a soul and would be going somewhere better and maybe be reunited with her loved ones like Fiyero in another life, that she would have some sort of hope. And I think as an atheist reading that, it's painfully relatable, because in some ways I think life would be easier if I believed in souls and some sort of afterlife and, all of those things. In some ways they are very comforting. I don't personally believe they're real, and I'm not kept up at night about it, but I can understand having that feeling of wishing that you had that comfort, wishing you had that conviction, and that you were able to pull as much comfort and hope and peace from that as other people can. I think that's sort of another layer added into the reason for her answer, and also just this idea in some ways that she's lost herself and her soul is that piece of herself that she can't seem to find and bring back, that she has become a bit of a shell of who she used to be, and she doesn't know how to get it back. She's been through too much, she's lost too much, and the world is so bleak and she doesn't know how to find it again, and it's quite sad. It's also interesting near the end, I had forgotten this, that the wizard came from his land. Well, not only that the wizard is Elphaba's father, which is much more heavily hinted at and sort of tied into the story in the musical. It's more of a late stage reveal, I feel like, in the book. Maybe not late stage, I guess it was implied earlier on too, but we get more confirmation near the end. But just this confirmation that the wizard in his world, in our world, was being ostracized and was barred from opportunities for being Irish, and that he had lost hope and was attempting suicide. This idea that he knew what it was to be discriminated against, and yet he took this opportunity as a being from another world to take control, become a dictator, and subjugate and oppress in a way that he was a victim of in even more extreme ways. And I just find that so despicable that he doesn't see that what he's doing to the animals is so deeply wrong and have compassion for them. He is totally fine to scapegoat them and to make them a common enemy and to use them to placate the people and to hold on to this power that he has stolen and held on to at any cost. And I guess in some ways he has followed a similar journey to Elphaba in that they have been treated poorly and treated like they are less than, dehumanized for things they can't change, and that constant dehumanization has impacted their ability to feel compassion and care for the people around them, and they have lost their humanity in some ways along the way and sort of embraced the dark side, and obviously on very different scales, and the wizard is many orders more evil than Elphaba. But it is interesting to see those multiple origin stories of an evil figure and the ways that evil is not necessarily born but created over a lifetime, although I'm sure there is something to be said for having the capacity for evil. I'm not sure most people, having gone through what the wizard went through, would become a dictator. I feel like you have to have a certain gene to be willing and able to lead an authoritarian government, but that's just me. Do I have more thoughts about the... I mean, I could probably open my book to any one of these many tabs and talk for a while. I did find this quote interesting. Elphaba is at a dinner party that Averick is throwing, and they're all talking about evil and the nature of evil over dinner. And this one character says, "It's an absence of good, that's all. The nature of the world is to be calm and enhance and support life, and evil is an absence of the inclination of matter to be at peace." And I just think that's really interesting because Elphaba is dealing with so much inner turmoil. She is unable to find peace. And again, it felt like she was starting to find that with Fiero's family, and that was stolen from her. And she just can't find that calm, belonging, and peace and contentment in her life after that point. And the absence of an inclination of matter to be at peace allows the evil to take over, essentially. So anyway, so much interesting stuff here. I truly could talk for hours and hours and hours, but again, I won't. Like I said, I think the first half is much tighter in its pacing and is a little bit more my speed in a lot of the more philosophical discussions, the thematic content. The second half loses a little bit of that inertia for me, but it still has lots of really interesting moments. Like I said, great writing, beautiful passages, still very fascinated by the characters, still really enjoy the journey, even if I feel like some of the parts that were cut out were the parts that I was most itching to read about. Still an amazing book. I give it 5 stars. So that is Wicked. Again, I want to reiterate, this is not a book for children. Please don't read this if you're a child. Also, my videos are not for children, so hopefully you're not watching this if you're a child in the first place. But I would not recommend this to children, maybe older teens. Just be aware going into it what kind of content there is. I will have all the content warnings. This is not an exhaustive list, though I have tried. Those are my thoughts on Wicked. I'm so glad I reread it. I had a great time. I still love this book. A not insignificant portion of that is the nostalgia I feel, but I do think that there is a lot of merit here. There's a lot of really interesting ideas. And again, the ideas feel deeply relevant to the world as it is right now, not in the least because of a whole, basically, religion called TikTokism. But yeah, I would highly recommend it. And I would be curious to know if you have read Wicked for the first time in more recent years or as an adult. How did it land for you? How did you feel about it? Do you agree with me that the first half is stronger than the second half? What was your rating? Did you have qualms? Let me know in the comments. I would love to know. So I'm going to stop talking about the book because, again, I could go on forever, but I feel like what I really should do is talk about the movie. So, like I said, my husband and I went to the movie tonight. I have my ticket. I was a bit worried because, like I said, I have history with this musical. I have been aware of this musical since when it first came out. I have known every word to every song, every harmony from a young age. And so I was very worried about the movie because I felt like there were so many ways in which it could let me down. And I think the thing I was most worried about was Ariana Grande's acting. I wasn't sure on that casting choice. And the vocals, not the ability of the singers to sing, because I knew they all had amazing voices, but I was a bit worried about how it would be handled in the post-production, how much editing, how much auto-tune and other processing would be done, because I have seen so many musicals and live action reimaginings of Disney, for example, that so overuse production tricks and processing and pitch correction that just make my ears want to bleed, especially as someone with a degree in musical theater who loves musical theater. There's something so raw and emotional and vulnerable and human about a human voice, and pitch correcting it to within an inch of its life removes so much of that emotion and the humanness of it, and those vocal cracks, the vocal fry, the slight flat or sharp note that then resolves to be right on pitch, vibrato that has character, dynamics, grittiness in the voice. There are so many aspects of, and I promise I won't go on forever about this, but I'm passionate about it. A human voice is beautiful because it is human, and the overuse of things like autotune and melodyne, etc., zap the magic out of it for me as someone who loves what the human voice can do and what the human voice can convey, especially as a storytelling device. So that was something I was very worried about. I'm happy to say, while I do have nitpicks, because of course I do, the movie was pretty freaking great, okay? It was better than I expected it to be. I enjoyed it a lot. I may have shed a couple tears. I was pretty invested, and, you know, I don't think there was any song that I was completely turned off by, or any casting choice that felt completely wrong, or anything like that. There were little moments and little things that I had qualms about, but largely I thought it was really great. The sets and or CGI, I'm sure it was both, were beautiful. The costuming was amazing, just gorgeous. The hair and makeup on everyone except for Ariana Grande was so good. I thought Cynthia Erivo's green paint looked perfect. It was so gorgeous, and the way they styled her hair in so many of the scenes was just absolutely stunning. She looked amazing the whole time, and I loved all of the intricacy and the layers and textures in a lot of her costumes. She looked great the whole time. Ariana Grande, the makeup department, I feel, failed her. There was so little color to her face, and I'm not a makeup artist, but I do like makeup, and I do have some experience doing makeup in a more professional setting, in that I had to do my own makeup for a lot of the professional productions I was in when I was still performing in musical theater for a living. A lot of times the cast does not have makeup artists. We do our own makeup, we apply our own wigs. And so I have a little bit of knowledge of how to do makeup for stage. And now part of my job is doing my makeup basically only when I'm going to be on camera. So I know a little bit about doing makeup for camera. She did not have enough contrast. Her eyebrows were too light. Her makeup was very flat. She had very little color to her face, almost non-existent eye makeup other than her big fake lashes, which were very obvious because she had so little makeup and nothing to blend at the lash line. Very little lip color, cheek color. She could use a little bit of blush, something to warm it up, especially because the color of her hair washed her out so much. And again, that's not what this video is about, but I just found it very distracting watching the movie, especially because Cynthia looked so ridiculously good, and they did such an amazing job with her makeup, and so many of the other characters had fantastic hair, and Ariana Grande's hair wasn't awful, I guess, but there were so many scenes where it was very messy. There were so many times where her hair just got in her face in a way that did not seem planned. If they used her actual hair, it felt like they should have given her a wig, and they should have had someone whose job it was to make sure her wig looked good at all times. Nitpicking, okay? But anyway, so the visuals were fantastic. The one thing I have to say about visuals that I was not totally on board with was the cinematography, and my issue with it is not that it wasn't beautiful, because it definitely was, but there were so many times that they chose shots that maybe looked beautiful aesthetically, but did not serve the story and the acting. There were so many moments, especially at the start of songs and quiet moments of songs, that are so much about storytelling and emotional vulnerability and character development, where we could not see the characters' faces because the shot was too pulled back and the character was in the midst of jumping and running and doing other things where you couldn't see their face at a moment that doesn't really make sense contextually within the storytelling arc of a song. And again, I won't get too into the nitty-gritty on this, but I did spend a couple years studying things like the arc of a song, specifically in musical theater, and all of the different pieces and how we tell a story and how we show the, escalation of emotion and how we show ever-greatening character development and reveal something new to the audience through a song. And so much of that involves needing to see a character's face and their facial expression and their eyes, especially. I think about the start of The Wizard and I, which is one of the greatest I Want songs of a generation. The beginning was so choreographed, had so much blocking that Cynthia Erivo had to do, that we could not focus on her face and her eyes and her emotion and the information she was processing and how it was building into this dream that she never thought she could dream. It is so important to the development of her character, and instead we're focused on how pretty the set looks, and that should not be the focus of that moment. I think about the moment where Nessa comes to tell her sister something exciting. I'm trying not to give spoilers for anyone who doesn't know the story, but there was a song where we get a quiet moment where Nessa is very excited and telling her sister this exciting development, and the way it's set up is they're sitting facing each other, which is fine. Profile, not the best, but fine. But Elphaba is cheated just slightly to the camera so we can see her face more clearly, and Nessa is cheated away. That's theater terminology, cheating towards or away from the audience is basically turning yourself, angling yourself. And in theater and in film, largely you are cheating towards the camera or towards the audience so they can actually see you, because again, that is important and relevant. And Nessa is cheated away. So she's facing like this, where you can see her profile, but she's slightly turned away, and this is her moment. This is her vulnerable moment. This is her character development. This is her telling her sister how excited she is. This is the build up for a reveal later. This is part of multiple characters' character arcs, and we can't see Nessa's face, except barely in profile. Why? I don't know. It was such a weird choice to me, and the shot looked great. The set looked amazing, and I get it, but, you know, give us a second or two of that to establish the shot, and then let us see Nessa's face while she's singing, please. It was such a weird choice to me. There were also some where you could see their faces, but it just felt like a bit of a jarring shift, I would say, in I'm Not That Girl. The start of that song was a bit jarring, the way that we got into the song, but I'll let that pass. But there was a moment where we were in one setting, and then all of a sudden, within an instant, she has traveled a great distance and is somewhere else, and she's sitting not even on 1/3 of the screen, but she's so pushed to the right hand side of the screen for us, the viewer, so over here, I guess, for you. And it just is such a jarring shift. We don't know how she got there, and it feels very odd and unsettling, and she goes from being alone in nature, singing this song to herself, to sitting in a public place with a bunch of people in the background, which is fine. I mean, in musicals, a lot of the time, you know, you have a character singing as if they are alone. They're singing their inner thoughts, so the people around them can't hear them, and that's fine, and that's sort of part of suspending your disbelief for musical theater. But it was just such a jarring shift, and the shot again was beautiful, but it felt so sudden and out of place. We didn't need to see her getting back there necessarily, but I wish that part of the song had taken place in the nature setting. I get that they wanted to transition for the last part of the song for something else they had planned, and that's fine. I think it could have been done in a more gradual way that didn't feel so jarring again, and that's one of those times where I just felt like the cinematography was taking precedence over the storytelling. You know, making it look pretty in a still was more important than the arc of the song. And I won't say that that was an issue in every single song, but it happened enough times that I was starting to get really frustrated by it, especially in the shots where I could not see the actor's eyes. There's a reason why we say the eyes are the window to the soul, and it's so important in a lot of these songs in musical theater that you can see someone's face, see the way they are emoting. It's vital. It's just vital. So anyway, that bugged me. And again, overall, I think it was really well done. I think the casting was pretty great. The pacing was good. They definitely made some little additions here and there, and I liked them. I thought they were, for the most part, quite funny and relevant. I really enjoyed the rouge my knees joke, which is such a musical theater joke. Rouge my knees and roll my stockings down and all that jazz. All my musical theater fans know what I'm talking about. Just this idea of Glinda's friends saying, we're gonna go rouge our knees, and then running away, making an excuse. Just great. Love that Chicago reference. I laughed really hard. Oh yeah, having Jeff Goldblum's face sticking out of a rock during The Wizard and I was a weird choice and took me out a little bit. I don't know. That didn't need to happen. It was so odd. Maybe that was supposed to just be part of the rock face, but I don't know, in like a random grotto. It was weird. Just saying. The Wizard and I, like I said, I didn't like the cinematography at the start of it. I also thought the way it started, some of the choices, which I'm not going to blame on Cynthia. I'm assuming that the director pushed her in this direction, as directors are wont to do. It felt like she was already where she needed to be later in the song, right at the start, in a way that kind of cheats you of a little bit of that growth and realization. It felt like she'd already realized what the song is about her realizing, so in some ways I found that a little jarring that the song started that way. But once we got through some of the weird cinematography at the start and got towards the end of the song where she was given the chance to sing directly to the camera and we were able to see her eyes and her emotion. It's so ironic that I keep saying that because of the drama around the poster, I know, but as much as the poster thing is a separate issue that I'm not going to touch on in this video, and if you don't know what I'm talking about, Google it and you will find many people talking about it, but it is genuinely important within songs, especially I Want songs, to be able to see the actor's eyes. So once we could see her face clearly and her eyes, I thought the song was great. I thought her voice sounded amazing. I thought the choices she made vocally were beautiful. I love that song and I thought it was gorgeous. And I also loved the physical comedy that came in when she was on the staircase. Just great. And that's how we'll begin, the wizard and I. Loathing was awesome. I loved having two cameras on them as they're writing their letters. Also, I know that the song Loathing is not called Loathing, it's What Is This Feeling? But I have always called it Loathing, so sorry. It's always Loathing to me. I love the montage here and just kind of showing their time at Shiz and all these different classes, and thought the choreography was really fun, very energetic. Love the ensemble cast. They're killing it. They're dancing their asses off. Love to see it. I just like the choice to give Elphaba powers from birth. I feel like the movie really focused on this, that she is powerful and a powerful sorceress from the moment she is born, in a way that is very, very different from the book. And I think there is something more relatable, obviously, to a character who is not a powerful sorceress from birth, but someone who slowly learned and studied and came into their power, came into their own over time. I feel like it stunts the character arc a little bit, and it removes a little bit of the agency from her character, that it's something that she had to work towards. Obviously in the film they show that she needs to work hard to learn to master her powers and to be able to control them, because they are just sort of an eruption of emotion that she can't control. But I prefer how it's handled in the book, that she's not a sorceress. She is a person who is green, just happens to be green. And later on, she learns these skills with study and trial and error and a lot of effort. And the way that the flying monkeys come to be is very different in the book and much more science-based. It also ties in with her relationship to Dr. Dillamond in a way that is very heartbreaking and touching. And that's something that is removed from the narrative in the movie. Something Bad was great. I loved the way they did the shadows on the wall during that song. They were really effective, and it's very clever and very powerful. As any bookworm will probably say after watching this movie, I have a new dream library unlocked. Looking at the library at Shiz with the spinning walls. Fantastic. I loved the way that they were used in the choreography of Dancing Through Life, which is one of my favorite songs from this musical. Probably one of the ones I've sung the most over the years. Life's more painless for the brainless. Why work so hard when it's so soothing? Because it's just so darn fun to sing, although it did hurt my heart a little bit to see movie Fiyero stepping on books, sliding on books, throwing books around. A little hurtful to my soul. But the library, fantastic. The choreography was really fun for that number. It did feel like this song had a little bit more processing on it. I am not super familiar with the actor who played Fiyero, and I don't know if I've ever heard him sing before. I don't really know what his background is. I do feel like the song didn't need the amount of processing it had. It did feel a little excessive to my ear, but again, I am pretty anti-processing vocals in musicals. I would rather there be literally zero. I know that they won't do that, but I would prefer that for sure. Like I said, I was very concerned about Ariana Grande's acting, and I will say she pleasantly surprised me quite a bit. I did find her performance in the first 15% to 20% of the film quite stiff and a little less nuanced than I would like. She was definitely playing the ditzy thing a little more heavy-handedly than I prefer, because Glinda really is a very intelligent, astute, manipulative person, and she is a bully, and she learns to be kinder. She learns to not judge a book by its cover. She learns these things slowly. She becomes a better person slowly, and in some ways it felt like, I know that the musical kind of plays into this characterization of Glinda as well, but I do think it makes her feel very flat at the beginning, and it also feels a bit incongruous because she comes across as so ditzy, so empty-headed, and yet she is quite cruel, and she is a bully, and it almost is played, at least in this film, as if she's not fully aware that what she's doing is incredibly cruel. And once she realizes that what she's doing is actually bullying, she feels terrible and, presented as her never having bad intentions, I suppose, which feels a little like the easy way out, because she's not meant to be entirely a good character. In many ways, they're meant to sort of flip. It's this, they start at the beginning, Glinda is the mean bully, and Elphaba is our protagonist who we care about, who is kind and thoughtful and compassionate. And in the end, Glinda becomes the good witch and Elphaba becomes the wicked witch of the West. And that's supposed to be that crossover. And again, it's always nuanced. they always both have both good and evil within them. And even at the end, Glenda is not entirely good. It's kind of part of the commentary, and Elphaba is not entirely bad. But there was meant to be that sort of character arc, that story. And I felt like her character arc was less interesting to me because she started off sort of very, almost felt a little dead behind the eyes, which was unfortunate. Luckily, that did not carry through the entire film. I really did feel like, especially once she and Elphaba started to connect, there was a lot more richness to her performance. We saw a lot more emotion from her. And I was really impressed by some of her acting later on in the film. Part of it is her eyebrows, because she always looks really sad and concerned. And I feel like she really played into that sort of stunned deer in headlights thing in the first little portion of the movie. And that felt very one note, but she does start to have more scope of emotion as the film goes on. And I did appreciate that. I also thought her voice sounded great. Comes in singing at the beginning, sounds beautiful. She has a lovely upper range. She has nice vibrato. And I really enjoyed her take on popular. I do feel like there were a couple moments that they tried a little too hard to add in, moments of comedy. She did do some great physical comedy in the movie, and she was very funny in a lot of that song. But there were a couple moments that felt a little too manufactured that I did not find as entertaining and wanted them to just keep moving on with the song. But there were definitely many moments where she injected comedy into her performance, and they landed very well. I think she's very well suited to this part. I really wish they'd done her makeup better, but again, I'm gonna have to deal with that, I guess, but there's so little contrast on her face. I will say I am not a fan of Ariana Grande's dancing, and again, I am such a nitpicker because dance is where I came into musical theater from. That's what I have the most training in, and I am very picky about dancing, and the ensemble was so good. Their dancing was just fantastic that her dancing really stood out. She is very stiff and awkward, and her lines, the way she uses her hands, just very hard to watch as a dancer. She was clearly trying, so I appreciate that. It wasn't great, but it's okay. Her singing was great. She sounded fantastic. I don't feel like Cynthia really danced much at all, except for that sort of interpretive dance interlude, which felt a little out of place in some ways in the film. It was a bit odd, but I did think she had a very nice quality of movement. I don't know how much dance training Cynthia Erivo has, but she has much more of a fluid control of her extremities, I would say, than Ariana Grande does. This is an issue I have with the musical in general, so it's not just the film, but I do wish that more of the commentary on the subjugation of not only the animals, but also various groups of people, including the quadlings, was more explored. It's such a big piece of the book, and I do feel that combining, again, this is more of a criticism of the musical and not the movie, because the movie is doing what the musical did. I do wish they'd kind of brought some more of that back, but I realize they have a limited amount of time, but they did split it into two, so maybe they could have done some of it. Just saying. But combining Averick and Fiyero into a single character and basically using almost all of Averick's personality and eliminating who Fiyero is culturally and the fact that he is canonically a dark-skinned man and he is othered for that reason, removing that factor, and the fact that he and Elphaba have a point of relation of being othered for their appearance and for their background in a way that Fiyero in the movie just is not. This isn't anything against the actor who plays Fiyero or any other actor who has played Fiyero in the musical, because that was a choice of the people who adapted the book into the musical in the first place. But it would have been nice to see, even if Fiyero wasn't split back into his separate characters, if they had maintained a little bit more of the animal rights plotline or talked a little bit about the quadlings. Obviously, the quadlings are entirely eliminated from the film. They're not mentioned at all. Turtleheart doesn't exist as a character, but also Elphaba's entire backstory is very different. Not only does Shell not exist, her little brother, but her dad, instead of being a poor unionist pastor, is the governor of Munchkinland, and there's just a lot of changes in the dynamic there, and I think those changes are for the worse. Personally, I think they remove a lot of the subtext, a lot of the extra layers of commentary, and there are so many ways in which the commentary on religion and the different types of religious faith within Oz are compared and contrasted to some of the other themes and some of the other aspects of the story, like the authoritarian regime and the propaganda and the origin of evil, good versus evil, nature versus nurture, free will versus destiny. So many of these themes tie in very closely to the different ages and different types of religion within Oz, and having her father be a pastor and her sister Nessa be so deeply religious is such a big part of the book. And again, pulling that out remove so much of that thematic content that to me is the core of the book and what makes it so fascinating. They do maintain some of the animal rights plotline. We do still have Dr. Dillamond. We do still have indications of the way that the regime is dehumanizing them and taking away their rights, but the propaganda is not addressed in the same way. There are little smatterings of it, but they remove a lot of the inclusion of propaganda that is in the book. And again, that's something that I feel is very valuable in the book. It's some of the commentary that I think is most interesting and again, most relevant to our current lives, because we're dealing with a huge amount of political propaganda and targeted messaging and twisting of narratives for specific political ends that often involve stripping groups of people of their rights. So coming out with this movie at this time and eliminating those themes almost entirely from the story, even if that is in line with what the musical did, feels like such a missed opportunity to me. And maybe they're going to address it more in the second half, but so much of that is established in their time at Shiz in the book that I struggle to see how it's going to be explored in a way that I would find sufficient, I suppose, and would be as powerful as it could have been in the second half, knowing what I know about where the story goes in Act 2. And this could have been an opportunity for a whole new generation of young people to get that message and to have that planted as a little seed in their mind and to encourage critical thinking and compassion and empathy. And there was a little bit of that again with the animals plotline, but it just is so diminished from the book. And I really truly feel like including some more of those little scenes and little moments from the book that really wouldn't have added that much runtime would have really driven it home in a way that would have been worth doing in my mind. But anyway, I'm going to move on. I'm Not That Girl was beautiful. Like I said, I already talked about the cinematography. I thought the switch from the forest to Shiz was a bit jarring. I also found some of the riffs at the beginning felt a little out of place. Overall, I really enjoyed Cynthia's vocal performance, and so many of her riffs were quite beautiful, and I felt like they were well placed and not overdone or distracting. But there were a couple just at the start of I'm Not That Girl that felt out of place just because of the way that song starts, and it is such a slow burn. It is such a slow realization. It is so quiet and introspective and character driven, and some of those riffs at the beginning felt a little too singy for that part of the song. So much of musical theater starts in a very talk space, both in range but also in quality, and then gets more singy as the song goes on and expands in range, becomes more musical and less in a talking space as the emotion rises. That's kind of what musical theater does, and that's part of the formula and part of how musical theater songs are constructed. Again, I won't get too into the nitty-gritty, I promise, but having riffs too early in a song like that feels very jarring, especially as someone who is very familiar with musical theater as a genre, and it feels too much like a pop performance when they are too early on. Once you get to the emotional explosion of the song, once you get to the climax, once you get to that huge crescendo, that's when the riffs really make sense from an emotional, acting, character-driven standpoint. They make a lot less sense when you're just starting to transition from dialogue into song. But still, that song was beautiful. I really enjoy Cynthia Erivo's voice. I'm not super familiar with her voice. I have heard her sing a couple things, but I thought she was so well cast for this role, and her voice is really very beautiful, and she did such a great job of so many of these iconic songs. I did really enjoy Glinda's name change and how performative activist it is of her. I do think it's sad because in the book, her name change is so much more genuine and sincere and has to do with a character that is not in the musical or the movie. So it makes sense that it is presented in a different way, but it does make me kind of sad that her name change is done in a way that feels like beginning of the story Glinda and not halfway through the story Glinda, who has had more of a character arc and is starting to actually care about the people around her and see past her own vanity, that she has begun to be aware of other people and to feel responsible for her actions in a way she wasn't before. Love Defying Gravity, gorgeous. I did find some of the moments that paused for other things that were happening a little jarring and stressful because I was just waiting for the next part of the song because I know the song so well. I mean, a lot of people do, but I just thought It was so gorgeously sung. It was so powerful and emotional. I definitely had tears in my eyes. It was very dramatic and intense, and Cynthia's voice sounded stunning, and the controversial riff was great. I loved it. I wasn't sure about it when I heard it in the trailer. Like many musical theater fans, I was a bit taken aback by how different it was from the classic riff, but it very much makes sense within the context of this performance, the way the song is presented in this movie, and was a very amazing mic drop moment of a finale for part one of the film. So final thoughts, I guess I will just say for, again, our protagonists, Cynthia Erivo, stunning, fantastic job. Her acting was so earnest and sincere and vulnerable. She was very lovable. I felt so attached to her. I was rooting for her. She looked great. She sounded so good. She sounded so good. And I just thought her acting choices were really beautiful. She had a lot going on behind the eyes, or in her eyes, in every scene. There were many layers to her performance, and I really just felt it was a pleasure to watch her in this role. I thought it was incredible. Ariana Grande very much pleasantly surprised me. Again, I wasn't a huge fan of her acting choices in the beginning. They felt a bit flat, but she really blossomed as the film went on. I found her very funny, very charming. Her voice sounded great. She is a great singer. We know that already. She sounded great. And I thought she really embodied the role, especially once we got past like the first third or so, in a really beautiful way. And she and Cynthia have fantastic chemistry. They really truly feel like they love each other. In the film, their love feels much more platonic than it does in the book. But again, in the musical, I feel like the musical also presents their love as much more platonic. They were roommates, and that's it. In the musical and in the film, but they have amazing chemistry. They feel like they really care for each other. When they're looking at each other, you feel like they are in the same room and they are looking into each other's eyes and they are feeding off each other's energy. And that's really beautiful to see, and I think really important for this film and these roles. But as much as they are both, you know, these huge presences in the film, and Ariana Grande is a huge pop star and very famous, this really is Elphaba's story. And I did feel like Cynthia was the star in this film, which I'm very happy to see. I mean, Ariana Grande did great, and Glinda is in a lot of the movie, as makes sense for her character and how prominent she is in the story, but this was really the Cynthia show, and I think she knocked it out of the park. It's a very iconic role. There are some huge shoes to fill in this role, and I think she really stepped up. I'm getting a bit emotional. And I was pretty emotional watching the movie because I love this movie. I love the story. I love these songs, and it was really beautiful to watch, and I did not sing along because I am not a monster. And I respect my fellow moviegoers' experience, but I did mouth along with every single word of every song because I couldn't stop myself. And as soon as we left the theater, I was singing the songs, and I'm gonna have them stuck in my head forever now. And I'm just so glad that I liked it, and it was great. I'm very excited for part 2 now. I am going to do the shortest little spoiler section because I do want to talk about a couple things. So I'm going to do a quick spoiler moment for the movie. And that cameo, oh my gosh, I was not spoiled for it. I had a bit of an inkling. I wondered if in some way, shape, or form they would incorporate at least Kristen Chenoweth, because it felt like she was very involved in the marketing of this movie, and they kept showing her with Ariana Grande and talking about Ariana Grande's performance. But having her and Idina Menzel show up in the Emerald City and having them both have a little vocal moment and having Idina do her classic Defying Gravity riff, it was just so good. My theater cheered when they showed up, and it was just so lovely to see them on screen and to have them, oh my god, I'm getting emotional. To have them be part of this, especially to have Idina sing her riff, because it felt like a bit of a passing the torch to Cynthia, but also sort of saying, for anyone who freaked out about the riff, here you can hear the Idina Menzel sing the original riff as she did and popularized and made iconic for musical theater for all time. Hear her do it so that you can now listen to Cynthia do it her way, and you won't feel cheated and you don't have to be mad because you got Idina's version, and that's great, but here's Cynthia's version, and it is also valid valid and beautiful and a great choice acting wise and vocally. I loved their dynamic together. I loved getting to see them together. They are, you know, iconic for a reason, but it was great that they were part of it. That made me very happy. And obviously other people in the theater, and I'm sure many musical theater fans will be very happy for that fan service, but also just, it felt very respectful of their contribution to making Wicked a sensation. They are icons and they are iconic for playing these roles, and so incorporating them and including them and having the moments of them with Cynthia and Ariana, I'm not gonna lie, that was one of the moments that I started to cry, because it really does feel like passing the torch to a new generation and, you know, them giving their blessing, and that feels very like silly probably to people who are not big musical theater nerds, but I thought it was beautiful. Obviously, I'm an emotional wreck. Okay, I also thought Dr. Dillamond was great. I thought the CGI for the animals was really, really good, and especially good for him. Obviously, his role is greatly diminished in this version of the story, which is too bad, but I did really enjoy, especially the moment where he and Elphaba kind of connect and establish their friendship. I thought that was really touching and sweet and lovely. And again, I really loved Something Bad, and I loved the shadows on the wall. That scene was very menacing, but also had a bit of a storybook, fairy tale quality to it that I really loved. Madame Morrible, I could have used more of the undertone of evil earlier on. The transition was a bit jarring, I guess is what I'll say. And if I didn't already know that Madame Morrible was evil, I feel like I would have been very taken aback by that transition. I do like the actress and I do like her take on the character. I just wish we'd had a little bit more of an inclination of what was to come, a little bit of more foreshadowing. I mean, there was a moment when Elphaba first had her outburst and that big demonstration of her ability, and Madame Morrible sees it. And then she comes down and pretends it was her and sort of covers for Elphaba, but it seems like she's trying to make herself seem more powerful. There was a bit of a hint, but then for so much of the rest of the beginning, well, really most of the film, she is such a supportive, loving, kind presence, and there really is no hint of an ulterior motive. So it is very jarring when she shows up at the end and is like, yes, spies, subjugation of animals, do what we say or else I will spread propaganda about you and send people out to murder you. It was very sudden. So, and that's not on Michelle Yeoh. I think she did a great job. I really like her as an actor, and I like what she did with Madame Morrible. I'm more putting that on the sort of vision behind the film and the director's choices. The director not giving us those little windows into the character, because it really is on the director to make those choices and to give the actors the chances to show that. I don't think the way the film was set up, there were many opportunities for her to show that, and the one opportunity she really had to show us, she did. So I'm not saying that's a Michelle problem. I think that Michelle Yeoh did a great job, and I really like her. As for Jeff Goldblum, he is always Jeff Goldblum in every role, and I like that. I think a lot of us do. I enjoy Jeff Goldblum. I do think his take on the wizard was kind of delightful. I also do think that, kind of similar to Madame Morrible, it was a little jarring, the transition, because he goes from being such a bumbling, lovable, seemingly harmless kind of fool character to being pretty evil. And we're really not given the subtext earlier on, and I feel like there could have been more moments of hinting at what's to come. Obviously, we have larger context of the society. Again, not as much as in the book, which is something I don't love, but we do get context that there are things being done within Ozian society that are hurting people, and there are armed guards being sent out to take professors away because their rights have been removed from them and they can no longer teach, etc., etc., etc. But he himself, as a man, seems like maybe he's, you know, an empty figurehead when we meet him, because he seems so harmless. And even the way things transition, it feels like Madame Morrible is the real mastermind, which there are implications of that in the book. But in the book, he has a lot more of his own free will and he's making a lot of his own choices, and he is more intentional in his choice to purposefully make the animals a common evil to maintain his authoritarian power. And that, I'm sure, is going to be established more and explored a lot more in part 2. But again, it was just a bit of a jarring transition, especially because Jeff Goldblum is so Jeff Goldblum-y that it's hard to see him as this evil authoritarian dictator of Oz, enslaving sentient beings, you know? It just feels very un-Jeff Goldblum of him, you know? So anyway, do I have more spoilery thoughts? I don't think so. I could go on and on probably about so many of the little details, but again, I've been talking for almost 2 hours now. I just looked. Wow. So I'm going to stop. Like I said, Really enjoyed the movie, was very pleasantly surprised, thought they did an amazing job. I have nitpicks. I was always going to have nitpicks, but they're much fewer and farther between than I expected. I had a great time. I'm probably going to go back and see it again in theaters, and I will definitely go see part 2. I would highly recommend you go see it. Hopefully you'll enjoy it as much as I did. If I were to rate it, I'd probably give it 4.5 stars out of 5. I think the half star is mostly the fact that they didn't add in a little bit more of the thematic content that is so deeply relevant right now when they could have, and that feels like a huge missed opportunity. But with what they did, I think they did a really fantastic job, and I really enjoyed it, and I'm happy about that. So that is the end of this video. Oh my goodness, wow, I'm tired. So happy to reread this book and share the process with you. So happy to have seen the movie and to share my immediate genuine reaction with you. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, give it a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Let me know if you want me to talk about more sort of book to film adaptations. I don't think it's necessarily going to become a regular thing on my channel, but I'm not against doing it again if it feels right, I guess. Thank you again to Parade for sponsoring this video. Don't forget to click the link in my description box and use my code BRIDE-BF to get 50% off their entire website. I highly recommend checking Parade out. I love Parade's pieces so much and wear them all day, every day, constantly. They're the best. I highly recommend. Get yourself some green and pink cozy underwear to celebrate Wicked and go see it in theaters, and let me know your thoughts on the book, on the movie, on Wicked in general, on all the themes discussed in the comments down below. One of my favorite things about being a YouTuber and making videos is getting to talk to you in the comments. So please leave your thoughts and feelings down below. I would love to chat with you, and I am going to go. So thanks for watching. I appreciate you, and I'll see you really soon in my next one. Bye, friends.